Frequency Podcast Network. Stories that matter, podcasts that resonate.
It's pandemic-style learning 2.0 for the more than 750,000 students across Alberta who've been out of the classroom for what will be week 3 due to a province-wide teacher strike. Protests have erupted, town halls have gone sideways as the provincial government and Alberta Teachers Association crawl further apart from each other at the bargaining table. Left in the middle, families who just want their kids at a desk in an Alberta classroom and who are also supportive of teachers being paid what they deserve. But with a potential back-to-work mandate now up in the air, the days ahead of the return of Alberta's legislature on October 27th were tasked with breaking an impasse that just seems unable to budge. I'm Maria Kestane, and today on The Big Story, I'm talking to Sean Amato, Alberta politics reporter for CityNews, to get the update on where things stand for the hundreds of thousands of students and hundreds of teachers who remain out of class with no return date in sight. Sean, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me.
So we're heading into week 3 of a province-wide teacher strike in Alberta, meaning upwards of 700,000 students have been out of classrooms for upwards of 3 weeks. What have the past few weeks looked like across the province?
It's been pretty tense, to be honest with you. Teachers are dug in. They say that they're swinging for the fences here, like the Toronto Blue Jays. They want to hit a home run. They want a deal that will essentially amount to generational change. They say that Alberta has the lowest per student funding per capita per student across Canada, and they want to change that. They want to raise the amount of money that the Alberta government is investing in education. So not just wages, but they want smaller class sizes. They want more money dumped into the education system in this province. The premier, the government is saying, yeah, we're willing to make some investments, but there is a major sticking point about how much exactly those investments need to be to get a deal. It doesn't look like a deal is close at all.
So to kind of bring us back to the beginning, just 3 weeks ago, when teachers, were about to go on strike, you mentioned wages and hiring more teachers. What is at the core of these talks that just have fallen apart basically over the past 3 weeks?
Well, essentially, the fight here is that we have the ATA that wants a lot of funding for the education system, and we have a conservative government that is essentially saying no. Albertans, by and large, for 60 years, save 4, have elected conservative governments here in Alberta. They haven't chosen to elect the Liberals or the NDP or other more left-leaning parties that would invest more in education. Rural Albertans in particular have consistently chosen lower taxes over investing in healthcare and education. And that is essentially the divide that we have here. The ATA wants more money in public education. They say that public education in Alberta is falling behind the rest of the country because there's just not enough classrooms, there's not enough teachers, there's not enough support in the classrooms. They are trying to bring in some fundamental change here, and they're using the bargaining process to do that. And the conservative government here is dragging their heels and essentially saying, no, this is not what voters voted for. Voters voted for a conservative government. We're willing to make some targeted investments to improve the system. But they're essentially saying this is not going to be an NDP public school system where they're dumping truckloads of cash into it. They're simply not willing to do that. So it looks like we're headed towards back to work legislation. And this fight probably is going to keep going for months, probably years. I spoke to an professor last week. He's a professor in human resources and labor relations. He was essentially saying, yeah, I see the government forcing teachers back to work because at this point they still don't even agree on what the problem is that they're trying to solve here. But his take on it was that back to work legislation is not good. It doesn't help solve the problems. It may put a Band-Aid on it. It may get students back into class quicker than otherwise, but it's not going to change this fundamental divide. He said that teachers will probably get even madder, will probably even become more stubborn in their demands if they are forced back into work. So it's not a long-term solution.
In terms of the long term, I know, you can't really predict the future, but I guess after seeing this strike and after seeing the way the Smith government has been treating, teachers and public sector workers, do you think Albertans will factor that into the next election when it comes to voting who will run Alberta next?
You know what? I'm as fascinated to see that as everybody else. What we did see is we actually saw some survey results, some polling results last week that showed like 89% of NDP voters in Alberta are siding with teachers. It's only 23% of UCP voters are siding with teachers. So there's certainly a political divide here in Alberta. It's beyond how much do you think teachers should be paid. Again, it goes back to that fundamental divide of, do Albertans want higher taxes and more money pumped into public services, or do they want low taxes? We have by far the lowest taxes in the country, and as a result of that, we have the lowest funded education system in the country. So really, it's become an ideological divide that goes way beyond the bargaining table. And where that gets sorted out, well, I guess we're going to have an election in 2027, a provincial election. This will probably be part of that election, like education is part of every election we have here. And Albertans are very divided down the middle. For the most part, it's you're an NDP supporter, you support teachers, you're a conservative supporter, you support the government, you see the targeted investments that they are willing to make. The government has basically put $2.6 billion on the table and says, we're willing to up your teachers' wages, we're willing to hire more teachers. The government is also spending $8.6 billion to build more schools because they've acknowledged that they've sort of neglected that issue. There simply are not enough classrooms to put all the students that have moved to Alberta. So the government essentially has put $10 billion on the table, which is a lot for a conservative government. Alberta is running a deficit as it is. The government is essentially saying there's no more money, and the teachers are essentially saying we don't care, find it, because we can't do our jobs in this current system.
So let's get into the details of this. We know that hundreds of thousands of students across the province have been out of the classrooms the past 3 weeks. Maybe to some, that's not the worst news. I'm sure when I was a student, I wouldn't have minded a break, quote unquote. But this really has disrupted learning. We know the provincial government has provided those online learning toolkits to help families, who are able to provide some sort of learning environment at home. How have those been working out? Are people actually finding them useful?
No, I don't think so. I don't think it's been very good. I mean, a lot of the students that are going through this strike right now, of course, were a lot of the students that lived through pandemic closures. So on one hand, I guess you could say they do have some familiarity with trying to learn at home. But on the other hand, it's just another hit to their education. I know a lot of parents just talking to people, they're frustrated. They want their kids to go back to school. We're hearing from, people who are in grade 12 who say, their education has already been hampered by the pandemic. Now this is really screwing up their grad year. They feel like they're getting shortchanged here. They're really upset about it. This obviously impacts, extracurricular activities, sports, that sort of thing. So the kids are really losing out here. And a lot of these kids have had to deal with this through the pandemic as well. So yeah, parents and students are not very happy about this whole situation. There has been some criticism about the online learning tools saying, they're not the Alberta curriculum. Some of the content is from the United States. I think the province probably had to come up with some sort of solution and do it quickly. So maybe, it's not the perfect solution. But yeah, it's going to be an issue, and it's certainly impacting parents and families. But what we're seeing from those survey results is that the majority of parents are supporting teachers. It's only 20 some percent are supporting the government in this. So far, it seems the teachers are winning that battle for public opinion. But clearly, parents and families are the losers here.
Yeah. I mean, even to that point, what has it been like at like the grassroots level? Have students themselves, because you have younger students, you have kids, but you also have those seniors, those like 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds that are vocal in the community that, want their voice heard, that would come out to rallies and protests. What have you been seeing on the ground?
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of protests. Last week in Edmonton, there was 10,000 teachers on the streets of Edmonton, and they chose that time, they chose that place because the premier was upstairs in Rogers Place in our big hockey arena, giving a state of the province to business leaders, and there was quite a contrast where there was this sort of quiet, very polite sort of premier providing this state of the province. And meanwhile, the elephant in the room, and you could literally hear protesters outside. You could hear people honking their horns. There was firefighters driving by in fire trucks, honking their horns in support of the teachers, as ambulances going through, honking in support of the teachers, that sort of thing. At all of the protests, we are seeing some students. And I should mention, it was really sort of the dial was turned up a few weeks ago. The government's been holding these Alberta Next panel consultations. There was a student, a grade 12 student, who went to that panel. He asked an off-topic question about the teacher strike, and that was when Alberta's the executive director of her office said that student should be turned over their parents' knee. Essentially, the parent should spank that student for speaking out of turn, for asking an off-topic question. And that, frankly, pissed off a lot of people. There are a lot of people here in Alberta that feel that this government disrespects public service workers. They do things like the book ban, that sort of thing. Basically, so as I've been going to these protests, I've been seeing a lot of signs from teachers, from healthcare workers, from other people saying, you can't spank us because we don't agree with this government. So yeah, there are a lot of people involved. That has made it even more political. I think the premier's executive director actually apologized for that and said, I made an inappropriate comment. He's still in his job. A lot of people wanted him fired and said, you that was highly disrespectful to Albertans, highly disrespectful to a young person who is concerned about his education, that sort of thing. So these are some of the things that have been happening in Alberta over the past few weeks, which has really turned up the temperature here. And yeah, people are really angry, and we're seeing that divide. Some people are supporting the governments. A lot of people, though, are going with the teachers and saying, you can't treat people that way.
You did mention that people are supportive of the teachers, and I'm sure week one, when the strike just started, parents and families in the community at large were very much backing of them. But I guess to some degree, week three, for families and parents that are just trying to make it to the end of the day, I'm sure there is some degree of burnout at play. What do you make of that? Do you think parents are ultimately getting a little tired, or worried?
Oh, yeah, I know parents are getting tired. I know parents are getting worried. They want their kids back in school. And to that end, the UCP government is going to have a cabinet meeting with cabinet ministers on Tuesday morning. And they're going to talk about back to work legislation. The legislature resumes next week. The first sort of date of business of the legislature is October 27th. Now, the finance minister and the premier have both talked about this being a potential day for when they can bring back to work legislation, essentially saying we're at an impasse here. This is not going to get solved anytime soon. They may force teachers back to work. That legislation, that decision could happen on October 27th. I'm assuming they'll give a few 2 days for everything to, for parents, for teachers, for everybody to prepare to go back. But it's possible that kids are back in the class by the end of the month. But as I mentioned, that probably will not solve the labor unrest, the labor dispute that is likely to keep going. But definitely, I think parents are going to be relieved by that. It's worth noting also the teachers are not getting paid. They're not getting strike pay from their union right now. So a lot of them are missing paychecks. And the teachers that I talk to say, we're doing this because we fundamentally need to change education in Alberta. We're not doing this to make money. A lot of them are losing money. They're going without paychecks right now to try to make this point. But again, it just kind of speaks to how dug in these two parties are. It's possible, it's likely actually that back to work legislation is going to come, and then some sort of enhanced mediation is probably going to come out of that. It's worth noting, though, that the Alberta Teachers Association, the teachers union, is not ruling out the possibility of defying those back to work orders. So yeah, this has gotten really messy. This has gotten really heated. And, even if teachers and kids go back to school in a couple weeks here, this labor dispute, this fundamental disagreement between the government and public service workers is likely to continue.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because, just a few months ago, we've seen Air Canada, they were sent back to work when they were, on strike and didn't necessarily send them back to work. We know that, flight attendants stayed on strike, defying strike orders. And just with, the heat and the tension that's at play in Alberta, I don't see personally the teachers heading back to the classrooms, even if that means being on strike illegally. So I'm sure, just the tension there will not make them budge.
No, and I talked to a couple of teachers at the protest that I covered last week, and they said, even if we are going back, they're going to go back mad. They're going to go back frustrated. They may do something like work to rule where they're in classroom for the hours that they legally need to be there, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be bringing back extracurriculars. It doesn't mean they're going to be teaching sports and music and whatever other things kids do at school after, typical school hours. So yeah, it just all goes back to the fact that we've got a fundamental disagreement here about the future of education. The ATA, there was an offer from the government and they rejected it. 90% of teachers said no to that deal. So they have a very strong mandate here. We also have another bargaining group, the Health Sciences Association of Alberta. Those are healthcare workers, they're pharmacists, they're physiotherapists, they're sort of hospital support workers, paramedics. They've also threatened to take a strike vote because they don't have a contract. So that's another 22,000 workers, public service workers, that could eventually be out of work as well. Because their healthcare would probably see back to work legislation very quickly. But it does speak to this widespread labor unrest in Alberta. Public service workers feel that they are being disrespected by this conservative government, and some of them aren't going to take it anymore. They want to fight back, and we're seeing that with the teachers. We may see that with some healthcare workers coming up as well. I was talking to some experts about why is this all happening, and they say, well, inflation is a major issue. We all know that in our lives. Inflation is a major issue. Wages haven't kept up. So a lot of these unions want to try to recoup some of the money that workers have lost in the past few years with high inflation. Also, we have a very conservative government here in Alberta, probably the most in the country. And so there is a fundamental disagreement here, and how it all gets sorted out. I guess we'll be talking about it for months, probably.
Yeah. I wonder what you think other provinces and other provincial leaders think of Danielle Smith, with her public sectors just going against her and defying what she's saying and not defying, but, not agreeing with how she wants to run her government. How do you think the overall sentiment towards Alberta is across the rest of the country?
I don't think she cares, quite frankly. Like the premier is laser focused on her rural constituents and how to keep her party together. There's been a survey result um, recently that says about half of UCP voters are actually separatists. So there is some divide within the Conservative Party as well, and that's Danielle Smith's main focus. Conservative premiers. They rarely get removed by voters in Alberta. They usually get removed by their own party. So I don't think Danielle Smith cares too much about what other premiers think. I don't think, frankly, she cares too much about what the media thinks. I think she is really laser focused on trying to keep her party together. There are a fair amount of people in rural Alberta who distrust public education. They homeschool their kids. They send their kids to private schools. They do these kinds of things because they think that teachers are socialists. They're run by a union that is bringing in LGBTQ2S plus content into schools, that sort of thing. So anytime you and I talk politics, it usually comes under this umbrella of, Danielle Smith needing to keep her party together, needing to keep the hardcore people together. And there's certainly an element in rural Alberta who say teachers are paid enough. I would gladly, they're saying I would gladly take 12% raises over 4 years. They're offering to hire 4,500 education workers. They've spent $8.6 billion on schools. Like, what the heck more does the union want? So the Danielle Smith does have some support from her grassroots, saying that teachers are greedy, they want way too much, they're all union people, and the government needs to fight back on that. So to answer your question, I really think that she is focused very much on her grassroots, on her political base. I'm sure there's probably some conservative premiers that could sympathize with her. Scott Moll out of Saskatchewan almost always sympathizes with her on pretty much anything. Probably Doug Ford as well would look at it and say, well, the $2.6 billion is not chump change for any provincial government, certainly not Alberta's. So I think she probably does have some support across the province or across the country, but I think she's really focused on her grassroots. The UCP government is going to have an annual general meeting coming up in Edmonton in November. There are some people that are going to that and saying, Danielle Smith hasn't been tough enough with other people. So there is a constituency in rural Alberta who want a fight back government. They want a government who will fight Ottawa, who will fight Trudeau Carney. They want a government that will push back against doctors and teachers and nurses and say, no, you make enough money, get out of my pocket. We want low taxes here in Alberta. So I think Danielle Smith, I'm sure she would love to have the support of other Canadians, but really she's laser focused on keeping her party together and holding power.
Sean, to wrap it up here, how crucial are the next few days before the legislature returns next Monday in order for a deal to be made?
To be honest, I'm not sure it's crucial at all. Like, I really think both sides are at an impasse. I think, barring something crazy happening here, I really do think we're headed towards that back to work legislation. I don't think they're going to solve anything in the next few days. There was a press conference, the Teachers Association held a press conference on Friday. Then the government held a press conference on Friday, and there wasn't a whole lot of talk of like a deal is close. Initially, Danielle Smith said a deal was close. She sort of moved away from that. What she confirmed to me last week is that there's a $2 billion gap. Essentially, the teachers want $2 billion more on top of the $2.6 billion investment. And she's essentially saying Albertans can't afford that. That's way too much. That's not necessary. She actually last week did something interesting in saying that, They asked teachers to go back to work on Friday, and the ATA basically laughed in their faces and said, "Why would we do that when you're not willing to give us what we want?" The premier did say, I am concerned about class sizes. I am concerned about complexity. So what she wants to do is make a deal, get it done, get teachers and students back in the classroom. And then she's offering to do something that Ralph Klein did like 20 some years ago, which is have an education commission to try to sort out some of these things. The issue that people have with this idea is that Ralph Klein came in, had that commission, said, we're going to keep these class sizes at this level. We're going to have standards for class sizes, but the government never actually lived up to that promise. So a lot of people are saying we've seen this before. The government just wants to ram through a deal. Then they want to make promises that they're never going to keep. So to answer your question, in the next couple of days, I don't see much movement. I could be proven wrong. I'm sure teachers, parents, everybody out there in Alberta hopes that I'm wrong. But if you're reading the tea leaves, if you're really listening to the things that the ATA and the province are saying, it doesn't look like there's an end in sight here.
Well, it will be an interesting few days to come. Sean Amato, Alberta politics reporter for CityNews. Sean, always great having you on the show.
Always a pleasure chatting. Thank you.
And that was The Big Story. You can send us feedback on this episode or any other episode by emailing us at hello@thebigstorypodcast.ca or find us on X at TheBigStoryFPN. If you like this episode, be sure to share it with a friend or with someone you think might like it. The Big Story drops new episodes every mornings, Monday through Friday. I'm Maria Kestane. Thanks for listening.